Durban, South Africa. First, let's take a look at the headlines. Now, millions across Britain vote in general election to choose the next Prime Minister. The Labour Party is tipped for a historic win, ending a 14-year Conservative rule. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu reportedly convenes a meeting of his security cabinet to discuss proposals from Hamas about a possible ceasefire deal in Gaza. And Russian President Vladimir Putin and China's Xi Jinping have pushed their anti-West agenda at the Shanghai Cooperation Organization meet, urging allies to resist external influence. The European Union slaps up to 38% extra duties on import of Chinese EVs, citing unfair state subsidies, ignoring Beijing's warning that the move would trigger a trade war. And ICC T20 Cricket World Cup winners, Team India, get a grand welcome back home with special breakfast meeting with Prime Minister Narendra Modi in New Delhi and a victory parade in Mumbai. Hello and welcome. We continue to track the tensions in Kenya, where anger against the William Ruto government persists. The Kenyan president has been trying to defuse tensions, but protesters are not ready to budge and want William Ruto to step down. In the latest, President William Ruto has been forced to make another U-turn. He has decided to freeze salary hikes for members of the cabinet and the parliament. President Ruto has ordered a review of salary increases for public servants. Now, initially, a government panel had recommended a pay increase of 2% and 5% for all state officials, including judges. However, people in Kenya and even the opposition have questioned how the salaries of MPs and governors could be raised when the country was reeling under economic distress. Skyrocketing inflation and a cost of living crisis. Now, public anger has been running high over what protesters see as rampant government extravagance. Around 900,000 public servants in Kenya from both national and county levels consume $8.5 billion annually, which is around 47% of the national revenues. This leaves 53% of national revenue for 54 million Kenyans. Under a 2012 Kenyan legislation, the public wage bill should not exceed 35% of the national budget. Earlier, Ruto also pledged to scrap allowances for the office of the First Lady and the Deputy President's wife, which would reportedly save $9.3 million. The latest measures follow Ruto's decision last week to withdraw the contentious finance bill that proposed tax hikes. The bill triggered violence and unrest across several Kenyan cities. 25th of June was the deadliest day of violence when angry crowds ransacked the parliament as police fired live bullets at protesters. Clashes also erupted on Tuesday as police fired tear gas at angry protesters. The capital city, Nairobi, witnessed violence with demonstrators pelting stones and security officers firing tear gas shells and rubber bullets. In Nairobi and Mombasa, there were also reports of looting and damage to property. Police say over 270 people, masquerading as protesters, went on a criminal rampage. Around 200 suspects were arrested in Nairobi and other parts of the country. Kenya's Interior Cabinet Secretary has vowed to end violence at whatever cost.
Gen Zs are suffering because lack of job. There's no job in Kenya. People are trying, are starving. They are working hard, but there's nothing they can get. This problem has been caused by our president. We need our president to hear our cries.
However, protesters say the violence was stoked by goons who were hired by politicians to discredit the legitimate demonstrations. 39 people have been killed and over 350 have been injured during 2 weeks of protests. The bloodshed has further angered the protesters who are demanding Ruto's resignation.
We have seen now there's an increase of goons who are now being paid to come and just disrupt whatever we are trying to do. And it's very unfortunate, to be honest, because whatever we are doing right now, it's not just for the young people, it's not about the millennials or Gen Zs, it's for everyone. We as a country have gone through these problems from independence, and those are the things that we are trying to change.
This is the most serious crisis that Ruto is facing since he took office in September of 2022. The Kenyan president has insisted that the financial measures were vital to keep the government running and to ease a huge public debt of around $78 billion, which is nearly 70% of the GDP. The Kenyan president has been forced to walk back on his decision. Now, can the protests and growing anger against him force him to step down? For more on this, we have with us political analyst Patrick Bond, who is joining us live from Johannesburg, South Africa. In fact, he has recently returned from Nairobi. Welcome to First Post.
Oh, thanks. Good to be with you again, Alyson.
Right now, Patrick, since you've just returned from Nairobi, can you tell us more about what has been happening on the ground in the Kenyan capital and what is it like in this situation at the moment?
Well, I think it was a relatively quiet day. There were protests, but the business and even informal sector were, largely absent in the central business district. But this followed an upsurge from not only last Tuesday, which resulted in the parliament, but on Thursday when there were still protests aimed at the State House, at William Ruto's own offices, and then the International Monetary Fund and World Bank offices on Friday, some protests on Tuesday, and then today. It feels like there's momentum. It may be slowing, and as you pointed out, there may be some, let's say, nefarious elements introduced from external sources. The politicians in Kenya have been trained since Daniel Arap Moi several decades ago how to sort of stay in power through licit and illicit means, and William Ruto is no exception. He barely won this last election last year, and he had been in 2007 called up to the International Criminal Court with an arrest warrant because of the violence associated with that election. So, you can't really expect him to play fair at this point, given his history, and also his attempt through very marginal changes, scrapping the bill that was so contentious over raising taxes last Wednesday, and then today, as you pointed out, ending some of the increases for MPs and other top salaried officials in the government. And those MPs are on the run. I don't think they're basically courageous enough to face their constituencies, whether at the home district or in Nairobi itself.
Right, Patrick, you just touched on my next question in that these moves by President Ruto won't have much of an effect on this huge debt crisis situation in the country. Now, will this be enough, him making another U-turn in this? Will it be enough to appease the protesters and to quell their anger? The demonstrations changed to calls for Ruto to step down. Is this still what the protesters are demanding?
Well, I think so. And I happen to be in not only Nairobi, but near Mount Kenya in Chuka, university town. And the delegitimization, not only in the central cities, but also in the countryside, seemed quite profound. So Ruto probably has to go. But it's not only a matter, Alyson, of a president going. It's a system, and the system won't be changed by these marginal decreases in the budget on especially some of the top civil servant salaries. That's relatively small beer. And the really big questions remain, will $35 billion in debt, which has risen from around $13 billion just 7 years ago, will that huge, especially foreign debt, be able to be question whether the protesters force those who made the loans, whether that's the International Monetary Fund, the commercial bankers, the purchasers of the Eurobond debts that Kenya issued in the last few years, or the Chinese, who have about 18% of the debt. Those big foreign debtors, creditors, will have to perhaps come to the table at some point if these protesters continue to sort of ramp up. And that would be different than, for example, in Tunisia or Egypt, where similar IMF riots, protests inspired by this austerity, actually were quelled, and a new government took over and then ended up repaying the debt.
And Patrick, how has Gen Z changed the protest culture in Kenya during these demonstrations? Could you elaborate on this movement and its impact?
You know, I'm terribly impressed. I do, amongst various studies, consideration of social mobilizations across the continent. I've been doing that for around 40 years. And the first IMF riots, International Monetary Fund protests because of the austerity, taking away subsidies or raising taxes, those began in Argentina in 1982, and they've been sweeping poor countries, and they've been repeating themselves. What's really interesting, I found in the Gen Z protest, and also when I was with the Pan-African Climate Justice Alliance, where they had a school I was lecturing at in near Mount Kenya. And it's that sense of connecting the dots and being bigger than just typically what happens, fighting a subsidy cut or, in this case, a tax increase. And that is to say, they are interested in all of the reasons behind the structural reasons, and those include the IMF pushing Kenya too fast, too far into a world economy, and the climate catastrophe. There were hundreds killed in floods and also droughts over the past 3 years, and these really add massively to the spending and then cut down on the revenues of the state. They have to be all addressed in a coherent way. I'm more confident Gen Z will do it than any of their predecessors.
Absolutely. Patrick, as always, great to speak to you, and thank you for your valued insights on all the latest coming out of Kenya.
Thank you.
Moving on to Egypt now, where a new government has been sworn in. President Abdel Fattah el-Sisi has reshuffled his cabinet as the country continues to face severe economic pressures and power cuts. Now, President el-Sisi took charge for a third term in April of this year. The new 30-member cabinet, led by Prime Minister Mustafa Madbouli, has 20 fresh faces. Key ministers, including finance and foreign ministers, have been replaced. Ahmed Kuchuk is the country's new finance minister. He was earlier the deputy finance minister and also a former World Bank economist. Badr Abdel Ati is succeeding veteran diplomat Sameh Shukri as the foreign minister, while Abdel Majid Saour replaces Mohamed Zaki as the defense minister. Now, there have been changes in the investments and foreign trade, oil, tourism and electricity ministries as well. 4 women are also a part of the new cabinet, while some of the prominent figures have retained their ministries, including the Interior Minister Mahmoud Tawfik. But those replaced have a tough task to do, as their appointment comes amid some key challenges that Egypt faces at the moment, specifically the foreign and finance ministers. Egypt's economy is in the doldrums. The inflation rates hit an all-time high at 40% last year, while the Egyptian pound has depreciated by 2/3. There is an urgent foreign currency shortage. Talking about the foreign policy front, the country finds itself in the middle of deep regional instability stemming from the war in Gaza. Egypt is a key party in the war, playing the role of mediator between Israel and Hamas. It has hosted multiple rounds of ceasefire negotiations, and while the fighting has dragged on for over 8 months, hundreds and thousands of refugees are seeking shelter in Egypt. Not just this, but discontent is rising over several other domestic challenges. Citizens are distressed due to the long power cuts and gas shortages, and there has also been a sharp decline in tourism, which is crucial for Egypt's economy. Thus, there have been changes in all the ministries in charge of these issues. Now, these changes were anticipated, as el-Sisi had tasked the Prime Minister last month to shape a new government that is more capable of solving Egypt's issues at home and abroad. But it's not just the cabinet. Changes have also been made in the military ranks. Several senior officials have been replaced, including the Chief of Staff, And it should be noted that ministers in Egypt have limited decision-making authority, and the real power resides with the presidency, military, and the security services. El-Sisi was himself an army chief before he ousted Egypt's first democratically elected president. The announcement of the cabinet changes coincides with the 11-year anniversary of this event. El-Sisi has been since then known for carrying a sweeping crackdown on political dissent. He won a third term with over 89% of votes in December last year, where he was pitted against largely unknown candidates, marking an absence of real opposition. But the third term could be harder for El-Sisi to navigate, and it is yet to be seen, will the new cabinet make his job easier? Shifting focus to West Africa now, where neighbors Benin and Niger are looking for a patch-up. Months of diplomatic dispute between the two resulted in border closures and shutdown of a major oil pipeline. Niger's junta has finally agreed to come to the negotiating table and to hold talks with Benin's government. Now, these talks have been mediated by Benin's two former presidents, who last month met Niger's military leader, Abdourahmane Tichiani. Now, the authorities from both countries have conveyed about the upcoming talks, though no date has been finalized yet. Now, a resolution could mean the resumption of oil exports via a China-backed pipeline. It could also mean the reopening of borders and the resumption of trade between the two sides. Though both the neighbors traditionally shared cordial ties, tensions erupted after the Niger coup in July of last year, which saw the removal of the democratically elected president, Mohamed Bazoum. Now, ECOWAS member Benin then condemned the takeover and responded with sanctions and threats of military intervention in Niger. Niger, in retaliation, closed borders with Benin, halting trade. To force Niger into opening borders, Benin has blocked Niger's access to its port, which is key to Niger's oil exports through a major pipeline. The nearly 2,000-kilometer pipeline runs through the oil fields in Niger to Seme Port in Benin. Landlocked Niger needs Benin's sea access for its oil exports. The pipeline has been constructed by a Chinese firm, and as per a $400 million loan deal, Niger is supposed to export oil to China for the repayments. Benin has been pressuring Niger to reopen borders to allow access to its port for exports. However, Niger military leaders so far have refused to give Benin this leverage. There are security challenges as well, as rebel groups have attacked the pipeline. Niger has accused Benin of hosting insurgents to destabilize the region. However, Benin has denied the accusations. Due to all the challenges, Niger last month suspended its oil exports to China. The leadership was not ready to mend ties with Benin, but it has now changed its mind. As per reports, the military leaders now agree that there is a need for dialogue and diffusing tensions. The reason could be majorly economic. Niger is missing out on key money through its oil exports. As per the World Bank, the oil exports could boost Niger's economy and make it fastest growing economy in Africa this year. Niger needs to export, and it was also reportedly looking for other alternatives other than Benin to get sea access. But these alternatives were also not without challenges, and finding another investor would be difficult for rerouting the pipeline. So perhaps Niger's military now realizes that working out the existing pipeline would be the best. And finally, to our special segment, Resurgent Africa. Amid reports of coups and crises that dominate the headlines from the continent, we get you positive stories that often get overlooked. In a strategy to outsmart poachers, South African scientists have injected radioactive material into rhino horns. This unconventional move aims to make these prized appendages easier to spot at border posts, where they are sought after for their supposed medicinal magic in Asian markets. With rhino horns fetching prices rivaling gold and cocaine on the black market, this initiative could be the unexpected twist needed to tip the scales in favor of the conservationists. Our final report gets you all the details.
Rhino poaching remains a daunting challenge in conservation efforts worldwide. Despite stringent strides in wildlife protection, the demand for rhino horns, particularly in Asian markets where they are believed to have mystical healing powers, continues to drive illegal hunting. South Africa, which is home to the majority of the world's rhino population, stands at the forefront of this battle. It's grappling with escalating poaching incidents despite stringent measures. In a daring bid to outsmart poachers, South African scientists have injected live rhino horns with a dose of high-tech flair. These are basically radioactive chips that glow on scanners at border posts. James Larkin, the brain behind this scheme, detailed the process. This innovative approach, he assured, renders the horn as useless as a glow stick for any human uses.
We are also doing this because it makes it significantly easier to intercept these horns as they are being trafficked over international borders, because there is a global network of radiation monitors that have been designed to prevent nuclear terrorism, and we're piggybacking on the back of that.
One is to render the horn totally useless, not consumable by human beings. It's essentially poisonous for human consumption, for whatever needs people use this for. But also importantly, through the detection systems that we have at airports, any rhino that is being transported through our airports will be detected because of the radioactivity.
The process is fairly an easy one. They tranquilize the rhino first, after which it gently snoozes on the grassy ground. A small hole is drilled to insert the chip, and the procedure completes with a flourish by spraying 11,000 microdots over the horn surface. The rhino feels no discomfort during the operation.
The rhino remains intact with its horn. It's able to continue to engage with its fellow rhinos in a socially meaningful way, and in that sense, it's a non-destructive, non-invasive way in which we're trying to deal with the problem.
The radiation level is so low that it poses no threat to the rhinos or their environment.
We tried to poison the horns. That didn't work. Dehorning doesn't work. Nothing works. But this is something you can't destroy, you can't throw it away, and it petrifies people, you know. Oh, it's radioactive, so we gotta run. That's what we want.
But this process doesn't end here. The post-op procedures are also vital for the chips to work.
All the blood samples and things have been taken now at this preliminary time. We follow up again in 6 months. Final blood samples are taken, and then we can do all of the analyses that we need to show that these rhinos are going to be protected from now into the future.
Despite government efforts, poaching remains a serious concern. In 2023 alone, 499 rhinos fell victim, marking an 11% increase from the previous year. However, this project offers a glimmer of hope. 20 rhinos are now equipped to trigger detectors at global border posts. Originally meant to deter nuclear threats, experts say this is a game changer in the battle against wildlife crime. With an estimated 15,000 rhinos in South Africa, this initiative is crucial for their survival.
And that's it on the show for today. We will see you again tomorrow at the same time. Thank you for watching, and goodbye.